Such reflections appear visionary to the eye of the practical statesman, but they are within the range of possibility to the philosopher. He can imagine that in some distant age of claim, through the influence of some individual, the notion of common property may or might have sunk as deep into the heart of others and have become as fixed to them as private property is to ourselves. He knows that this latter institution is not more than 4 or 5 thousand old. May not the end refer to the beginning? In our own age, even utopias affect the spirit of legislation, and an abstraction idea may exercise a great influence on practical politics. The objections that would be generally urged against Plato's community of property are the old ones of Aristotle, that motives for extraction would be taken away, and that disputes would arise when each was spent upon all. Every man would produce as little and consume as much as he liked. The experience of civilized nations has hitherto been adverse to socialism. The effort is too great for human nature. Men try to live in common, but the personal feeling is always breaking in. On the other hand, it may be doubted whether our present notions of property are conventional, for they differ in different countries and in different states of society. We boast of an individualism which is not freedom, but rather an artificial result on the industrial states of modern Europe. The individual is nominally free, but he is also powerless in a world-bound hand and foot in the chains of economic necessity. Even if we cannot expect the mass of mankind to become disinterested, at any rate, we observe in them a power of organization which 50 years ago would never have been suspected. The same forces which have revolutionized the political system of Europe may effect a similar change in the social and industrial relations of mankind. And if we suppose the influence of some good as well as neutral motives working in the community, there will be an absurdity in expecting that the mass of mankind having power and becoming enlightened about the higher possibilities of human life when they learn how much more is attainable for all than is at present the position or favored view by pursue the common interest with an intelligence and persistency which mankind have hitherto never seen. Now that the world has once been set in motion and is no longer held fast under the tyranny of custom and ignorance, now that criticism has pierced the veil of tradition and the past no longer overpowers the present, the progress of civilization may be expected to be far greater and swifter than heretofore. Even at our present rate of speed, the point at which we may arrive in 2 or 3 generations is beyond the power of imagination to foresee. There are forces in the world which work not in an arithmetical but in a geometrical ratio of increase. Education, to use the expression of Plato, moves like a wheel with an ever multiplying rapidity. Nor can we say how great may be its influence when it becomes universal, when it has been inherited by many generations, when it is freed from the tremors of superstition and rarely adapted to the wants and capacities of different classes of men and women. Neither do we know how much more the cooperation of minds or of hands may be capable of accomplishing, whether in labor or in study. The resources of the natural sciences are not half developed as yet, The soil of the earth, instead of growing more barren, may become many times more fertile than hitherto. The uses of machinery far greater and also more minute than a present. New secrets of physiology may be revealed, deeply affecting human nature in its innermost recesses. The standard of health may be raised, and the lives of men prolonged by sanitary and medieval knowledge. There may be peace, there may be leisure, there may be innocent refreshments of many kinds. The ever increasing power of locomotion may join the streams of earth. There may be mysterious workings of the human mind, such as occurred only at the crisis of history. The East and the West may meet together, and all nations may contribute their thoughts and their experience to the common stock of humanity. May the other elements enter into a speculation of this kind, but it is better to make an end of them, for such reflections appear to the majority far-fetched, and to men of science commonplace. Neither to the mind of Plato nor of Aristotle did the doctrine of community of property present at all the same difficulty, or appear to be the same violation of the common Hellenic sentiment, as the community of wives and children. This paradox he prefaces by another proposal, that the occupations of men and women shall be the same, and that to this end they shall have a common training and education. Male and female animals have the same pursuits, why not also the two sexes of men? But have we not here fallen into a contradiction? For we were saying that different natures should have different pursuits. How then can men and women have the same? And is not the proposal inconsistent with our notion of the division of labor? These objections are no sooner raised than answered, for according to Plato, there is no organic difference between men and women, but only the accidental one, that men beget and women bear children. Following the analogy of the other animals, he contends that all natural gifts are scattered about indifferently among both sexes, though there may be a superiority of degree on the part of the men. The objection of the score of decency to the taking part in the same gymnastic exercises is made by Plato's assertion that the existing feeling is a matter of habit. That Plato should have emancipated himself from the ideas on his own country and from the example of the East shows a wonderful independence of mind. He is conscious that women are half the human race, in some respects the more important half lost, and for the sake both of men and women he desires to raise the woman to a higher level of existence. He brings not sentiment but philosophy to bear upon occasion which both in ancient and modern times has been chiefly regarded in the light of custom or feeling. The Greek had noble conceptions of womanhood in the goddesses Athene and Artemis, and in the heroines Antigone and Andromache. But these ideas had no counterpart in actual life. The Athenian woman was in no way the equal of her husband. She was not the entertainer of his guests or the mistress of his house, but only his housekeeper and the mother of his children. She took no part in military or political matters, nor, nor is there any instance in the later ages of Greece of a woman becoming famous in literature. Here is the greatest glory, who has the least renown among men, is the historian's conception of feminine excellence. A very different ideal of womanhood is held up by Plato to the world. She is to be the companion of the man, and to share with him in the toils of war and in the cares of government. She is to be similarly trained both in bodily and mental exercises. seeks to lose as far as possible the incidence of maternity and the characteristics of the female sex. The modern antagonist, the modern antagonist of the equality of the sexes would argue that the differences between men and women are not confined to the single point urged by Plato, that sensibility, gentleness, grace, and the quality of woman, which, while energy, strength, high intelligence, are to be looked for in men. And the criticism is just. The differences affect the whole nature and are not, as Plato supposes, confined to a single point, but neither can we say how far these differences are due to education and to opinions of mankind, or physically inherited from the habits and opinions of former generations. Women have been always taught innocently that they are slaves, but that they are in an inferior position, which is also supposed to have compensating advantages, and to this position they have conformed. It is also true that the physical form may easily change in the course of great generations to the mode of life, and the weakness of the legacy, which was once a matter of opinion, may become a physical fact. The characteristics of sex vary greatly in different countries and ranks of society, and at different ages in the same individuals. Plato, Plato might have been right in denying that there was any ultimate difference in the sexes of men other than which exists in animals, because all other differences may be conceived to disappear in other states of society or under different circumstances of life and breeding. The first wave having been passed, we proceed to the second community of wives and children. Is it possible? Is it desirable? For as Clark intimates, and as we far more strongly insist, great doubts may be entertained about both these points, and free discussion to the question is impossible, and mankind are perhaps right in not allowing the ultimate basis of social life to be examined. Few of us can safely inquire into the things which nature hides any more than we can dissect our own bodies. Still, the manner in which Plato arrived at his conclusions should be considered, for here, as Mr. Groth has remarked, is a wonderful thing that one of the wisest and best of men should have entertained ideas of morality which are wholly at variance with our own. And if we would do Plato justice, we must examine carefully the character of his proposals. First, we may observe that the relations of the sexes supposed by him are the reverse of licentious. He seems rather to aim at an impossible strictness. Secondly, he conceives the family to be an integral enemy of the state, and he entertains the serious hope that an universal brotherhood may take the place of private interest, as an aspiration which, although not justified by experience, has possessed many noble minds. On the other hand, there is no sentiment or imagination in the connections which men and women are supposed by him to form. Human beings return to the level of the animals, neither shouting to heaven nor abusing the natural instincts. All that word of poetry and fancy which the passion of love has called forth in modern literature and romance would have been banished by Plato. The arrangements of marriage in the Republic are directed to one object, the improvement of the race. In successive generations, a good development both of bodily and mental qualities might be possible. The analogy of animals tends to show that mankind can within certain limits receive as challenge of nature, and as in animals we should commonly choose the best of breeding and destroy the others, so there must be a selection made of the human beings whose lives are worthy to be preserved. We start back horrified for this Platonic ideal in the belief, first, that the higher feelings of humanity are far too strong to be cast out. Secondly, that if the plan could be carried into execution, we should be poorly recompensed by improvements in the breed for the loss of the best things in life. The greatest regard for the weakest and meanest of human beings in the infant, the criminal, the insane, the idiot, truly seems to us one of the noblest results of Christianity. We have learned to have seen perfectly that the individual man has an endless value in the sight of God, and that we honor him when we honor the darkened and disfigured image of him those. This is the lesson which Christ taught in a parable when he said, the angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven. Such lessons are only partially realized in the age they were foreign to the age of Plato, as they have very different degree of strength in different countries or ages of the Christian world. To the Greek, the family was a religious and customary institution binding the members together by tying very instinct to the friendship and having a less solemn and sacred sound than that of county. The relation which existed on the lower level of custom, Plato imagined that he was raising to the higher level of natural reason, while from the moderate and of Christian point of view, we regard him as sanctioning murder and destroying the first principles of morality. The great error in this and similar speculations is that the difference between man and the animals is forgotten in them. The human being is regarded with the eye of dog or bird fancier, or at best of slave owner. The higher of human qualities are left out. The breeder of animals aims chiefly at size or speed or strength, and a few cases at the courage of temper. Most often, the fitness of the animal for food is the great desideratum, but mankind are not bred to be eaten, nor yet for their superiority in fighting or in running or in drawing carts. Neither does the improvement of the human race consist merely in the increase of the bones and flesh, but in the growth and enlightenment of the mind. Hence, there must be a marriage of the two minds, as well as of bodies, of imagination and reason, as well as of lust and instincts. Man and woman, without feeling of imagination, are justly called brutes. Yet Plato takes away these qualities and puts nothing in their place, not even the desire of a noble offspring, since parents are not to know their own children, the most important transaction of social life. He who is the idealist philosopher converts into the most brutal, for the pair are to have no relation to one another, except at the hymeneal festival. The children are not theirs, but the state's, nor is any tie of affection to unite them. Yet here the analogy of the animals might have saved Plato from a gigantic error if he had not lost sight of his own illustration. For the nobler sort of birds and bears nourish and protect their offspring and are faithful to one another. An eminent physiologist thinks it worth while to try and place life on a physical basis, but should not life rest on the moral rather than upon the physical? The higher comes first, the lower first the human and rational, afterwards the animal. Yet they are not absolutely divided, and in times of sickness or moments of indulgence, they seem to be only different aspects of a common human nature which includes them both. Neither is the moral the limit of the physical, but the expansion and enlargement of it, the higher form which the physical is capable of receiving, as Plato would say, The body does not take care of the body, and still less of the mind, but the mind takes care of both. In all human action, not that which is common to man and the animals is the characteristic of element, but that which distinguishes him from them. Even if we admit the physical basis and resolve of virtue into health of body, la facon cannot sang cool. Still on merely physical grounds, we must come back to the ideas, mind and reason in duty and conscience. Under these or other names are always reappearing. There cannot be health of body without health of mind, nor health of mind without the sense of duty and love of the truth charm.
That the greatest of ancient philosophers should in his regulations about marriage have fallen into the error of separating body and mind does indeed appear surprising. Yet the wonder is not so much that Plato should have entertained ideas of morality which to our own age which to our own age are revolting, but that he should have contradicted himself to an extent which is hardly credible, failing in an instant form of the heaven of idealism into the crudest animalism, rejoicing in the newly found gift of reflection. He appears to have thought out of a subject about which he had better have followed the enlightened feeling of his own age. The general sentiment of Hellas was opposed to his monstrous fancy. The old poets, and in later time the tragedians, showed no want of respect for the family, on which what much of the religion was based. But the example of Sparta, and perhaps in some degree the tendency to divide public opinion seems to have misled him. He will make one family out of all the families of the state. He will select the finest specimens of men and women and breed from these only. Yet, because the illusion is always returning, the animal part of human nature will from time to time assert itself in the discourse of philosophy as well as of poetry, and also because any departure from established morality, even where this is not intended, is apt to be unsettling. It may be worthwhile to draw out a little more at length the objections to the Platonic marriage in the first place. History shows that whenever polygamy has been largely allowed, the race has deteriorated. One man to one woman is the law of God and nature. Nearly all the civilized peoples of the world at some period before the age of written records have become monogamous, and the step when once taken has never been retracted. The exception occurring among Brahmins or Mahomedans or the ancient Persians are of that sort which may be said to prove the rule. The connections formed between superior and inferior races hardly ever produce a noble offspring, because they are licentious and because the children in such cases usually despise the mother and are neglected by the father, who is ashamed of them. Barbarous nations, when they are introduced by Europeans to vice died out, polygamous peoples either import and adopt children from other countries or dwindle in numbers of both dynasties and aristocracies, which have disregarded the laws of nature, have decreased in numbers and degenerated in stature. Marriages, the covenants, leave their enfabling stamp on the offspring of them King Lear. The marriage of real relations, or the marrying in and in of the same family, tends constantly to weakness or idiocy of the children, sometimes assuming the form as they grow older of the passionate licentiousness. The common prostitute rarely has any offspring, But such unmistakable evidence is the authority of morality as said in the relations of the sexes, and so many more elements enter into this mystery that the dream by Plato and some other philosophers. Recent inquirers have indeed arrived at the conclusion that among primitive tribes there exists a community of wives as of property, and that the captive taken by the spear was the only wife or slave whom any man was permitted to call his own. The party existence of such customs among some of the lower races of men, and the survival of peculiar ceremonies in the marriages of some civilized nations are thought to furnish a proof of similar institutions having been once universal. There can be no question that the study of anthropology has considerably changed our views respecting the first appearance of man upon the earth. We know more about the aborigines of the world than formerly, but our increasing knowledge shows, above all things, how little we know. With all the helps which written monuments afford, we do but faintly realize the condition of man 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Of what of, of what his condition was when removed to to a distance 200,000 or 300,000 years, where the majority of mankind were lower and nearer the animals than any tribe now existing upon the earth. We cannot even entertain conjecture. Plato laws and Aristotle method may have been more right than we imagine in supposing that some forms of civilization were discovered and lost several times over. If we cannot argue that all barbarism is a degraded civilization, neither can we set any limits to the depth of degradation to which the human race may sink through war, disease, or isolation. And if we are to draw inferences about the origin of marriage from the practice of barbarous nations, we should also consider the remoter analogy of the animals. Many birds and animals, especially the carnivorous, have, have only one mate, the love and care of offspring, which seems to be natural is inconsistent with the primitive theory of marriage. If we go back to an imaginary state in which men were almost animals and to companions of them, we have as much right to argue from what is animal to what is human as from the barbarous to the civilized man. The record of animal life on the globe is fragmentary. The connecting lines are wanting and cannot be supplied. The record of social life is still more fragmentary and precarious. Even if we admit that our first ancestors had no such institution as marriage, still the stages by which man passed from outer barbarism to the comparative civilization of China, Assyria, and Greece, or even of the ancient Germans, are wholly unknown to us. Such speculations are apt to be unsettling because they seem to show that an institution which was thought to be a revelation from heaven is only the growth of history and experience. We ask what is the origin of marriage, and we are told that, like the right of property, after many wars and contests, it has gradually arisen out of the selfishness of barbarians. We stand face to face with human nature in its primitive nakedness. We are compelled to accept not the highest but the lowest account of the origin of human society. But on the other hand, we may truly say that every step in human progress has been in the same direction, and that in the course of ages the idea of marriage and of the family has been more and more divine and consecrated. The civilized East is immeasurably in advance of any savage tribes. The Greeks and Romans have improved upon the East. The Christian nations have been stricter in their views of marriage relation than any of the ancients. In this, as in so many other things, instead of looking back with regret to the past, we should look forward with hope into the future. We must consecrate that which we believe to be the most holy, and that which is the most holy will be the most useful. There is more reason for maintaining the sacredness of the marriage tie when we see the benefit of it than than we when we only felt a vast religious horror about the violation of it. But in all times of transition, when established beliefs are being undermined, there is a danger that in the passage from the old to the new, we may insensibly let go the moral principle, finding an excuse for listening to the voice of passion in the uncertainty of knowledge of the fluctuations of opinion. And there are many persons in our own day who, enlightened by the study of the anthropology, and fascinated by what is new and strange, some using the language of fear, others of hope, are inclined to believe that a time will come when through the self-assertion of women or the rebellious spirit of children, by the analysis of human relations, or by the force of our circumstances, the ties of family life may be broken or greatly relaxed. They point to societies in America and elsewhere which tend to show that the destruction of the family need not necessarily involve the overthrow of our morality. Whenever we may think of such speculations, we can hardly deny that they have been more rife in this generation than in any other. The waiter they are tending, who can predict to the doubts and queries raised by these social reformers respecting the relation of the sexes and the moral nature of man. There is a sufficient answer if any is needed. The difference about them and us is really one of fact. They are speaking of man as they wish or fancy him to be, but we are speaking of him as he is. They isolate the animal part of his nature. We regard him as a creature having many sides or aspects, moving between good and evil, striving to rise above himself and to become a little lower than the angels. We also to use a Platonic formula as not ignorant to the dissatisfactions and incompatibilities of family life, of the meanness of trade, of the flatteries of one class of society by another, of the impediments which the family throws in the way of lofty aims and aspirations. But we are conscious that there are evils and dangers in the background, greater skill, which are not appreciated because they are either concealed or suppressed. What the condition of man would but be in which human passions were controlled by no authority, divine or human, in which there was no shame or decency, no higher fiction overcoming or sanctifying the natural instincts, but simply the rule of health. Is it for that we are asked to throw away the civilization which the God of ages, for strength and health are not the only qualities to be desired. There are the more important in considerations of mind and character and soul. We know how human nature may be degraded. We do not know how we do not know by artificial means any improvement in the breed can be effected. The problem is a complex one, for if we go back only 4 steps and this at least enter into the composition of a child, there are commonly 30 progenitors to be taken into account. Many curious facts, rarely admitting of proof, are told us respecting the inheritance of disease of character from a remote ancestor. We can trace the physical resemblances of parents and children in the same family. Sic oculos, sic ille manus, sic ora ferebat, but scarcely less often the differences which distinguish children both from their parents and from one another. We are told of similar mental peculiarities running in families, and again of a tendency as in the animals to refer the common or original stock, but we have a difficulty in distinguishing what is true inheritance of genius or other qualities and what is mere imitation of the result of family or similar circumstances. Great men and great women have rarely had great fathers and mothers. Nothing that we know of in the circumstance of their birth or lineage will explain their appearance. On the English spots of the last and two preceding centuries, scarcely a dozen remains. None have ever been distinguished. So deeply has nature hidden her secret, and so ridiculous is the fancy which has been entertained by some that we might in time by suitable marriage arrangements, or as Sparta would have said, by an ingenious system of lots, produce a Shakespeare or a Milton. Ever supposing that we could breed men having a tendency of bulldogs, or like the Spartans, lacking the wit to run away in battle, would the run will be would the world be any better? May of noble specimens of human race have been among the weakest physically. Tyrtaeus or Aesop or our Newton would have been exposed at Sparta, and some of the fairest, strongest men and women have been among the weak, the weakest and worst. Not by the not by the Platonic device of uniting the strong or fair with the strong and fair, regardless of sentiment and morality, nor yet by his other device of combining dissimilar natures. Statesmen have mankind gradually passed from the brutality and licentious of primitive marriage to marriage Christian and civilized. For few persons would deny that we bring to the world an inheritance of mental and physical qualities derived first from our parents or through them from some remote ancestor, secondly from our race, thirdly from the general condition of mankind into which we are born. Nothing is commoner than the remark, so that so and so is like his father and his uncle, and each person may not unfrequently note a resemblance in youth to a long forgotten ancestor, observing that nature sometimes skips a generation. It may be true also that if we knew more about our ancestors, these similarities would be even more striking to us. Omitting the facts which are thus described in a popular way, we may however remark that there is no method of difference by which they can be defined or estimated, and that they constitute only a small part of each individual. The doctrine of heredity may seem to take out of our hands the conduct of our life of our own life, but it is the idea, not the fact, which really trivial for us. For what we have received from our ancestors is only a fraction of what we are or may become. The knowledge that drunkenness or insanity has been prevailing in family may be the best safeguard against their recurrence in a future generation. The parent will most awake to the vices or disease or in his child of which he is most sensible within himself. The whole of life may be directed to their prevention or cure. The traces of consumption may become fainter or be wholly effaced. The inheritance tendency to vice or crime may be eradicated, and so heredity from being a curse may becoming a blessing. We acknowledge that in the matter of our birth, as in our generally, there are previous circumstances which affect us. But upon this platform of circumstances, or within this world of necessity, we have still the power of creating a life of ourselves by the informing energy of the human will. There is another aspect of the marriage question to which Plato is danger. All the children born in his state are foundlings. It never occurred to him that The greater part of them, according to universal experience, will have perished. For children can only be brought up in families. There is a subtle sympathy between the mother and the child which cannot be supplied by other mothers or by strong nurses one more loss. If Plato's pen was a fatal, as the creatures of Paris of the founding hospital of Dublin, more than 9/10 of his children would have perished. There would have been no need to expose or put out of the way the weaker children for they would have died of themselves. So emphatically does not to protect against the drastic destruction of their family. What Plato, what Plato have heard or seen of Sparta was applied by him in a mistaken way to his ideal commonwealth. He probably observed that both the Spartan men and women were superior in form and strength to the other Greeks, and this superiority he was disposed to attribute to the laws and customs relating to marriage. He did not consider that the desire of noble offspring was a passion among the Spartans, or that the physical superiority was to be attributed chiefly not to their not to the various customs, but to their temperance and training. He did not reflect that Sparta was great, not in consequence of the relaxation of morality, but in spite of it, by virtue of a political principle stronger far than existed in any other Grecian state. Least of all did he observe that Sparta did not really produce the finest specimens of the Greek race, the genius, the political inspiration of Athens, the love of liberty, all that has made Greece famous with posterity, were wanting among the Spartans. They had no Themistocles, or Pericles, or Aeschylus, or Sophocles, or Socrates, or Plato. The individual was not allowed to appear above the state. The laws were fixed, and he had no business to alter or reform them. Yet whence has the progress of cities and nations arisen, if not from remarkable individuals coming into the world we know not how, and from causes over which we have no control. Something too much we Something too much may have been said in modern times on the value of individuality, but we cannot hardly condemn too strongly a system which, instead of stirring the scattered states or sparks of genius and character, tend to smother and extinguish them. Still, while condemning Plato, we must acknowledge that neither Christianity nor any other form of religion in society has hitherto been able to cope with this most difficult of social problems, and that the side on which Plato regarded it is that from which we turn away. Population is the most untamable force in the political and social world. Do we not find, especially in large cities, that the greatest hindrance to the amelioration of the poor is their improvidence in marriage? A small fault truly, if not involving endless consequences. There are whole countries too, such as India, or nearer home, Ireland, in which a right solution of the marriage question seems to lie at the foundation of the happiness of the community. There are too many people on a given space, or they marry too early and bring into the world a sickly and half-developed offspring, or owing to the very conditions of their existence, they become emaciated and hand on a similar life to their descendants. But who can oppose the voice of prudence to the mightiest patience of mankind laws, especially when they have been licensed by custom and religion? In addition to the influences of education, we seem to require some new principles of right and wrong in these matters, some forms of opinion, which may indeed be already heard whispered in private, but has never affected the moral sentiments of mankind in general. We unavoidably slow side to the principle of utility, just in that action of our lives in which we have the most need of it. The influences which we can bring to bear upon this question are simply indirect in a generation or two. Education, immigration, improvements in agriculture and manufacturers may have provided the solution. The state physician hardly likes to probe the one. It is beyond his art, a matter which he cannot safely let alone, but which he dares not touch. We do not skin film. We do not skin. We do but skin and film the archimedes place. When again, in private life, we see a whole family one by one dropping into the grave under the heat of some inherited malady, and the parents perhaps surviving them. Do our minds ever go back silently to that day, 25 or 30 years before on which, under the various auspicious, amid the rejoicings of friends and acquaintances, a bride and bridegroom joined hands with one another? In making such a reflection, we are not opposing physical considerations to moral, but moral to a physical. We are seeking to make the voice of reason heard, which drifts us back from the extravagance of sentimentalism on common sense. The late Dr. Combe is said by his biographer to have resisted the temptation to marriage because he knew that he was subject to hereditary consumption. One who deserved to be called a man of genius, a friend of my youth, was in the habit of wearing a black ribbon on his wrist in order to remind him that, being liable to outbreaks of insanity, he must not give way to natural impulses of affection. He died married in a lunatic asylum. These two little facts suggest the reflection that very few persons have done from a sense of duty what the rest of mankind ought to have done under like circumstances, if they had allowed themselves to think of all the misery which they were about to bring into the world. If we could prevent such marriages without any violation of willing or propriety, we clearly out, and the prohibition, the course of time, will be protected by a horror naturalis, similar to that which, in all civilized ages and countries, has prevented in the marriage of the relation of new relations by blood. Mankind would have been happier if some things which are now allowed had from the beginning been denied to them. If the sanction of religion could have prohibited practices inimical to health, if sanitary principles could in early ages have been infested with a superstitious urge. Oh, but living as we do far in living as we do far on the do far on in the world's history, we are no longer able to stamp at once with the impress of religion of new prohibition. A free agent cannot have his expenses regulated by law, and the execution of law would be rendered impossible owing the uncertainty of the cases in which marriage was to be forbidden. Who can weigh virtue or even fortune against health, or moral and mental qualities against bodily? Who can measure probabilities against certainties? There have been some good as well as evil in the discipline of suffering, and there are diseases, such as consumption, which have exercised a refining and softening influence on the character. Youth is too inexperienced to balance such nice considerations. Parents do not often think of them, or think of them too late. They are at distance and may probably be awaited change of place, a new state of life, and interest of a home may be the cure of them. So persons vainly reason when their minds are already made up and their fortunes irrevocably linked together. Nor is there any ground for supposing that marriages are to any great extent influenced by reflections of this sort, which seem unable to make any head against the irresistible impulse of individual attachment. Lastly, no one can have observed the first rising flood of the passions in youth, the difficulty of regulating them, and the effects of the whole mind and nature which follow from them, the stimulus which is given to them by the imagination, without feeling that there is something unsatisfactory in our method of treating them, that the most important influence on human life should be wholly left to chance or studied in mystery instead of being disciplined or understood, should be required to conform only to an external standard of propriety, cannot be regarded by the philosopher as a safe or satisfactory condition of human things, and still those who have the charge of youth may find a way by watchfulness, by affection, by the manliness and innocence of their own lives, by occasional hints, by general admonitions, which everyone can apply for himself to mitigate this terrible evil which eats at the heart of individuals and corrupts the moral sentiments of nations. In no duty towards others is there more need of retinence and self-restraint. So great is the danger lest he who would be the counsel of another should reveal the secret prematurely, lest he should get another too much into his power, or fix the passing impression of the evil by demanding the confession of it.
Nor is Plato wrong in asserting that family attachments may interfere with higher aims. If there have been some who, to party, gave up what was meant for mankind, there have certainly been others who to family gave up what was meant for mankind or for the country, the cares of children, the necessity of procuring money for the support, the flatteries of rich by the poor, the exclusiveness of caste, the pride of birth and of wealth, the tendency of family life to development from the pursuit of the ideal or the hierarchy are as lowering in our own age as in that of Plato. And if we prefer to look the gentle influences of home, the development of the affections, the amenities of society, the devotion of one member of a family for the good of the others, which from one side of the picture we must not carry with him, or perhaps, or rather to be grateful to him for having presented to us the reverse, without attempting to defend Plato on grounds of morality. We may allow that there is an aspect of the world which has not unnaturally led him into error. We highly appreciate the power which the idea of the state, like all other abstract ideas, exercised over the mind of Plato. To us, the state seems to be built up out of the family, or sometimes to be the framework in which family and social life is contained. But to Plato, in his present mood of mind, the family is only a disturbing influence which, instead of filling up, tends to disarrange the higher unity of the state. No organization is needed except a political, which, regarded from another point of view, is a military one. The state is all sufficing for the wants of man, and like the idea of the church in later ages, absorbs all other desires and affections. In time of war, chosen citizens are to stand like a rampart impregnable against the word of the Persian host. In time of peace, the preparation for war and the duties to the state, which are also the duties to one another, take up their whole life and time. The only other interest which is allotted to them besides that of war is the interest of philosophy. When they are too old to be soldiers, they are to retire from active life and to have a second novitiate of study and contemplation. There is an element of monasticism even in Plato's communism. If he could have done without children, he might have converted his republic into a religious order. Neither in the laws, when the daylight of common sense breaks in upon him, does he retract his error. In the state of which he would be the founder, there is no marrying or giving in marriage, but because the infirmity of mankind he condescends to allow the law of nature to prevail. But Plato has an equal, or in his own estimation, even greater paradox in reserve, which is summed up in the famous text: until kings are philosophers, or philosophers are kings, cities will never cease from ill. and by philosophers, he explains himself to mean those who are capable of apprehending ideas, especially the idea of good, to the attainment of this higher knowledge. The second education is directed through a process of training which has already made them good citizens. They are not to be made good legislators. We find with some surprise, not unlike the feeling which Aristotle is in a well-known passage describes the hearers of Plato's lectures as experiencing when they went to a discourse on the idea of good, expecting to be instructed in moral truths, and received instead of them arithmetical and mathematical formulae that Plato does not purpose for his spiritual legislators and his study of finance or law, of military tactics, but only of abstract mathematics as a preparation for the still more abstract conception of good. We ask with Aristotle, what is the use of a man knowing the idea of good if he does not know what is good for this individual, this condition of society? We cannot understand how Plato's legislators or guardians are to be fitted for the work of statements by the study of the five mathematical sciences. We vainly search in Plato's own writings for an explanation of this seeming absurdity. The discovery the discovery of good metaphysical conception seems to ravage the mind with a prophetic consciousness which takes away the power of estimating its value. No metaphysical inquirer has ever fairly criticized his own speculations. In his own judgment, they have been above criticism, nor has he understood that what to him seemed to be absolute truth may reappear in the next generation as a form of logic or an instrument of thought, and posterity have also sometimes equally misapprehended the real value of his speculations. They appear to them to have contributed nothing to the stock of human knowledge. The idea of good is apt to be regarded by the modern thinker as an unmeaning abstraction, but he forgets that this abstraction is waiting ready for use and will hereafter be filled up by the divisions of knowledge. When mankind do not as yet know that the world is subject to law, the introduction of the mere conception of law or design of final cause, that and the fact of anticipation of the harmony of knowledge are great steps onward. Even the good generalization of the unity of all things leads men to view the world with the different eyes and may easily affect the conception of human life, of politics, and also the conduct and character team. We can imagine how a great mind like that of Pericles might derive elevation from his intercourse with Anaxagoras, Peter. To be striving towards a higher but unattainable conception is a more favorable intellectual condition than to rest satisfied in a narrow portion of a certain fact. And the earlier, which have sometimes been the greater ideas of science, are often lost sight of at a later period. How rarely can we say of any modern inquirer in the magnificent language of Plato that he is the spectator of all time and of all existence. Nor is there anything unnatural in the hasty application of these first metaphysical conceptions to practical and political life. In the first enthusiasm of men are apt to see them everywhere and to apply them in the most remote sphere. They do not understand that the experience of ages is required to enable them to fill up the intermediate axioms. Plato himself seems to have imagined that the truths of psychology, like those of astronomy and harmonics, we arrive at by a process of deduction, and that the method which he has pursued in the fourth book, inferring them from experience and the use of language, was imperfect and only provisional. But when, after having arrived at the idea of good, which is the end of the science of dialectic, is asked what is the nature and what are the divisions of the science, he refuses to answer, and as if intending by the refusal to intimate that the state of knowledge which then existed was not such as would allow to a philosopher to enter into his final test. The previous sciences must find be studied must first be studied and will, we may add, continue to be studied till the end of time. although in a sense different from any which Plato could have conceived. But we may observe that while he is aware of the vacancy of his own ideal, he is full. He is full of enthusiasm in the contemplation of it. Looking into the orb of light, he sees nothing, but he is warm and elevated. The Hebrew prophet believed that faith in God would enable him to govern the world. To govern the world, the Greek philosopher imagined that contemplation of the good would make a legislator. There is as much to be filled up in the one case as in the other, and the one mode of conception is to the Israelite what the other is to the Greek. Both find a repose in the divine perfection, which, whether in a more personal or impersonal form, exists without them and independently of them as well as within them. There is no there is no mention of the idea of good in the Timaeus, nor of the divine creator of the world in the Republic, and we are naturally led to ask in what relation they stand to one another. Is God above or below the idea of good? Or is the idea of good another mode of the conceiving God? The latter appears to be the true answer. To the Greek philosopher, the perfection and unity of God was a far higher conception than his personality, which he hardly found a word to express and which to him would have seemed to be borrowed from mythology. To the Christian, on the other hand, or to the modern thinker in general, it is difficult, if not impossible, to attach reality to what he terms mere abstraction, while to Plato this very abstraction is the truest and most real of all things. Hence, from a difference in forms of thought, Plato appears to be resting on a creation of his own mind only. But if we may be allowed to paraphrase the idea of good by the words intelligent people of law and order in the universe, embracing equally man and nature, we begin to find a meeting point between him and ourselves. The question whether the ruler or statesman should be a philosopher is one that has not lost interest in modern times. In most countries of Europe and Asia, there has been someone in the course of ages who has truly united the power of comment with the power of thought and reflection, as there have been also many false combinations of these qualities. Some kind of speculative power is necessary both in practical and political life, like the rhetorician and the Phaedrus. Men require to have a conception of the verities of human character and to be raised on great occasions above the commonplaces of ordinary life. Yet the idea of the philosopher statesman has never been popular with the mass of mankind, partly because he cannot take the world into his confidence or make them understand the motives from which he acts, and also because they are jealous of a power which they do not understand. The revolution which human nature desires to effect step by step in many ages is likely to be precipitated by him in a single year of life. They are afraid that in the pursuit of his greater aims he may disregard the common feelings of humanity. He is too apt to be looking into the distant future or back into the remote past and unable to see actions or events which, to use an expression of Plato's, are tumbling out at his feet. Besides, as Plato would say, there are other corruptions of this philosophical statesman. Either the native hue of resolution is cycled, or, or the pale cast of thought, and at the moment when action above all things is required, he is undecided, or general principles are enunciated by him in order to cover some change of policy, or his ignorance of the world has made him more easily fall a prey to the arts or others, or in some cases he has been converted into a courtier when enjoys the luxury of holding liberal opinions, but was never known to perform a liberal action. No wonder that mankind have been in the habit of calling statesmen of this class pedants, sophists, doctrinaries, visionaries. For as we may be allowed to say, a little parodying the words of Plato, they have seen bad imitations of the philosopher statesman, but the man in whom the power of thought and action are perfectly balanced, equally to the present, reaching forward to the future, such as one ruling a constitutional state they have never seen. But as the philosopher is apt to fail in the routine of political life, so the ordinary statesman is also apt to fail in extraordinary crises. When the face of the world is beginning to alter and thunder is heard in the distance, he is still guided by his old maxims and is the slave of his inveterate party prejudices. He cannot perceive the signs of the times. Instead of looking forward, he looks back. He he learns nothing and forgets nothing. With wise souls and modern instances, he would stem the rising tide of revolution. He lives more and more within the cycle of his own party as the world before him becomes stronger. This seems to be the reason why the old order of things makes us hopeful and figure when confronted with the new, why churches can never reform, why most political changes are made blindly and convulsively. The great, the great crises in the history of nations have often been met by ecclesiastical positiveness and a more obstinate reassertion of principles which have lost their hold upon a nation. The fixed ideas of reactionary statesmen may be compared to madness. They grow upon him and he becomes possessed by them. No judgment of others is ever admitted by him to be weak in the balance against his own.
Plato, laboring underground to ardent readers, appears to have been a confusion of ideas, assimilates the state to the individual, and fails to distinguish ethics from politics. He thinks that to be most of a state which is most like one man and in which the citizens have the greatest uniformity of character. He does not see that the analogy is partly fallacious and that the will or character of a state or nation is really the balance or rather the surplus of individual wills, which are limited by the condition of having to act in common. The movement of a body of men can never have a can have can never have the pliancy or facility of a single man. The freedom of the individual, which is always limited, becomes still more straightened when transferred to a nation. The powers of action and feeling are necessarily weaker and more balanced when they are diffused through a community, whence arises the often discussed question: can a nation, like an individual, have a conscience? We hesitate to say that the characters of nations are nothing more than the sum of characters of the individuals who compose them, because there may be tendencies in individuals which react upon one another. A whole nation may be wiser than any one man in it, or may be animated by some common opinion or feeling which could not equally have affected the mind of a single person, or may have been inspired by a leader of genius to perform acts more than human. Plato does not appear to have analyzed the complications which arise out of the collective action of mankind. Neither is he capable of seeing that analogies, though specious as arguments, may often have no foundation in fact, or of distinguishing between what is intelligible or vividly present to the mind and what is true. In this respect he is far below Aristotle, who is comparatively seldom imposed upon by false analogies. He cannot disentangle the art from the features. At least he is always arguing from one to another. His notion of music is transferred from harmony or sounds to harmony of life. In this he is assisted by the ambiguities of language as well as the prevalence of Pythagorean notions. And having once assimilated the state to the individual, he imagines that he will find the succession of states parallel in the lives of individuals. Still, through this fallacious medium, a real enlargement of ideas is attained. When the features as yet presented no distinct conception to the mind, a great advance was made by the comparison of them with the arts, for feature is purely art, and has an outward form as well as an inward principle. The harmony of music affords a lively image of the harmonies of the world and of human life, and may be regarded as a splendid illustration which was naturally mistaken for a real analogy. In the same way, the identification of ethics with politics has a tendency to give definiteness to ethics, and also to elevate and ennoble men's notions, the aims of government and the duties of citizens. For ethics, from one point of view, may be conceived as an ideal. This law and politics and, and, poli- and politics as ethics reduced to the conditions of human society. There have been evils which have arisen out of the attempt to identify them, and this had led to the separation or antagonism of them, which has been introduced by modern political writers. But we may likewise feel that something has been lost in the separation, and that the ancient philosophers estimated the moral and intellectual well-being of mankind first, and the well of nations and individuals second, may have may have little influence on the speculations of modern times. Many political maxims originate in aggression against an opposite error, and when the errors against which they were directed have passed away, they in turn become errors. Plato's view Plato's views of education are in several respects remarkable. Like the rest of the Republic, they are partly Greek and partly ideal, beginning with the ordinary curriculum of the Greek youth and extending to afterlife. Plato is the first writer who distinctly says that education is to comprehend the whole of life and to be a preparation for another, in which education begins again. This is the continuous thread which runs through the Republic, and which, more than any other of his ideas, admits of an application to modern life. He has long given up the notion that the virtue cannot be taught, and he is disposed to modify the thesis of the Phytagoras that the virtues are one and not many. He is not unwilling to admit an sensible word into his scheme of truth, nor does he accept in the Republic the involuntariness of vice which is maintained by him in the Timaeus, Sophists, and Laws Apologue, nor do the so-called Platonic ideas recovered from a former state of existence, a very theory of mental improvement. Still we observe in him the remains of the old Socratic doctrine that true knowledge must be elicited from within, and is to be sought for in ideas, not in particulars of sense. Education, as he says, will implant a principle of intelligence which is better than 10,000 eyes. The paradox that the virtue are one, and the kindred notion that all virtue is knowledge, are not entirely renounced. The first is seen the supremacy given to justice over the rest, and second intended to absorb the moral virtues in the intellectual, and the center of goodness in the contemplation of the idea of good. The world of sense is still appreciated and identified with opinion, though admitted to be a shadow of the truth. In the Republic, he is evidently impressed with the conviction that vice arises chiefly from ignorance and may be curbed by education. The multitude are hardly to be deemed responsible for what they do. A faint allusion to the doctrine of reminiscence occurs in the 10th book, but Plato's views of education have no more real connection with the previous state of existence that our own his only proposes to elicit from the mind that which is that already education is represented by him not as the feeling of a vessel, but as turning the eye of the soul towards the like. He treats first of music and of literature, which divides into true or false, and then goes to gymnastics or invention in the Republic he takes no notice, though in the laws he gives sage counsels about the nursing of children and the management of the mothers, and would have an education which is even prior to both. In the first in the First Republic, he begins with the age at which the child is capable of receiving ideas and boldly asserts in language which sounds paradoxical to modern ears to modern ears that he must be taught the false because he can learn the true. The modern and ancient philosophical world are not agreed, agreed with about truth and falsehood. The one identifies truth almost exclusively with fact, the other with ideas. This is the difference between ourselves and Plato, which is, however, partly a difference of orders. For we too should admit that a child must receive many lessons which he imperfectly understands. He must be taught some things in a figure only, some to which he can hardly be expected to believe when he grows older. But, but we should limit the use of fiction by the necessity of the case. Plato would draw the line differently. According to him, the aim of early education is not truth as a matter of fact, but truth as a matter of principle. The child is to be taught first simple religious truths, and then simple moral truths, and insensibly to learn the lesson of good manners and good taste. She would make an entire reformation of the old mythology, like Xenophanes and Heraclitus. He is sensible of the deep chasms which separates his own age from Homer and Hesiod, whom he quotes in verse with an imaginary authority, but only for his own purposes. The lust and tragedies of the gods are to be banished. The terrors of the world below are to be dispelled. The misbehavior of the Homeric heroes is not to be a model of your youth, but there is another standard in Homer which may teach on youth endurance, and something may be learned in medicine from the simple practice of the Homeric age. The principles on which religion is to be based are two only. First, the God is true. Secondly, that he is good. Modern and Christian writers have often fallen short of this. They can hardly be said to have gone beyond them. The young, the young are to be brought up in happy surroundings, out of the way of sights of sons which may hurt the character or vitiate the teeth. They are to live in an atmosphere of health. The breeze is always to be wafting to them the impressions of truth and goodness. Could such an education be released of if our modern religious education could be bound up with truth and virtue and good manners and good taste? The, that would be the best hope of human improvement. Plato, like ourselves, is looking forward to changes in the moral and religious world and is preparing for them. He recognizes the danger of unsettling young men's mind by sudden changes of laws and principles by destroying the sacredness of one set of ideas when there is nothing else to take their place. He is afraid too of the influence of the drama on the ground that it encourages false sentiment, and therefore he would not have his children taken to the theater. He thinks that the effect on the spectators is bad and on the actors still worse. His ideas of education is that of harmonious growth, and in which the sensible learn the lessons of temperance and endurance, and their body and mind develop in equal proportions. The first principle which runs through all art and nature is simplicity. This also is to be the rule of human life. The second stage of education is gymnastic, which answers to the period of muscular growth and development. The simplicity which is enforced in music is intended to gymnastic. Plato is aware that the training of the body may be inconsistent with the training of the mind, and that bodily exercise may be easily overdone. Excessive training of the body is apt to give a man a headache or to render them sleepy. The lecture of philosophy and this they attribute not to the two cause but the nature of the subject. Two points are noticeable in Plato's treatment of gymnastics. First, that the type of training is entirely separated from the time of literary education. He seems to have thought that two things of an opposite and different nature could not be learned at the same time. He, Here we can hardly agree with him, and if we may judge by experience, the affair of spending 3 years between the ages of 14 and 17 in mere bodily exercise would be far from improving to the intellect. Secondly, he affirms that music and gymnastics are not, as common opinion is apt to imagine, intended, the one for the cultivation of the mind and the other of the body, but that they are both equally designed for the improvement of the mind. The body, in his view, is the servant of the mind. The subjection, the subjection of the lower to the higher is from the advantage of both. The doubtless mind Doubtless the mind may exercise a very great and paramount influence over the body, if exerted not at particular moments and by fits and starts, but continuously in making preparation for the whole of life. Other Greek writers saw the mischievous tendency of Spartan discipline Aristotle, but Plato recognized the fundamental error on which the practice was based. The subject of gymnastics. The subject of gymnastics leads Plato to the sister subject of medicine, which he further illustrates by the parallel of law. The modern disbelief in medicine has led in this, as in some other departments of knowledge, to a demand of greater simplicity. Physicians are becoming aware that they often make diseases greater and more complicated by the treatment of them wrapped in 2,000 years. In 2000 years, the art has made but slender progress, but what they have gained in the analysis of the past is in a great degree lost by the feebler conception of the human frame as a whole. They have attended more to the cure of diseases than the conditions of health, and the improvements in medicine have been more than counterbalanced by the disuse of regular training. Until lately, they have hardly thought of air and water, the importance of which was well understood by the ancients, as Aristotle remarks, air and water being the elements which we most use, have the greatest effect upon health. For ages physicians have been under the dominion of prejudices which have only recently given way, and now there are as many opinions in medicine as in theology, and an unequal degree of skepticism, and some may want of toleration about both. Plato has several good notions about medicine. According to him, the eye cannot be good without the rest of the body, nor the body without the mind charm. No man of sense, he says in the Timaeus, will take physic, and we heartily sympathize with him in the laws when he declares that the limbs of the rustic one with toil will derive more benefit from warm baths than from the prescriptions of a not otherwise doctor. But we can hardly praise him then. In obedience to the authority of Homer, he depreciates diet or approves the inhuman spirit in which he would get rid of invalid and useless leaves by leaving them to die. He does not seem to have considered that bridle of theories might be accompanied by qualities which were of far more value to the state than the health strength of the citizens, or the duty of taking care of helpless might be an important element of education in the state. The physician himself, this delicate and subtle observation should not be a man in robust health. He should have in modern physiology a nervous a nervous temperament, he should have experience of disease in his own person, in order that his powers of observation may be quickened in the case of others. The perplexity of medicine is paralleled by the perplexity of law, in which, again, Plato would have been follow the golden rule of simplicity. Greater matters are to be determined by the legislator or by the oracle of Delphi. Lesser matters are to be left to the temporary regulation of the citizens themselves. Plato is aware that laissez-faire is an important element of government. The diseases of a state are like the heads of Hydra. They multiply when they are cut off. The true remedy for them is not extirpation but prevention, and the way to prevent them is to take care of education, and education will take care of all the rest. So in modern times, men often felt that the only political measure worth having, the only one which would produce any certain or lasting effect, was a measure of national education. In our own modern than in any previous age, the necessity has been recognized of restoring the ever-increasing confusion of law to simplicity and common sense. When the training in music and gymnastics is completed, there follows the first stage of active and public life. But soon education is to begin again from a new point of view. In the interval between the fourth and seventh books, we have discussed the nature of knowledge and have thence been led to form a higher conception of what was required of us. For true knowledge, according to Plato, is for abstractions and has to do with particulars or individuals, but with universals only, not with the beauties of poetry, but with the ideas of philosophy. And the great aim of education is the cultivation of habit of abstraction. Is to be this is to be acquired through the study of the mathematical sciences. They alone are capable of giving ideal of relation and of arousing the dogma and the gist of thought. Mathematics in the age of Plato comprehended a very small part of that which is not included in them, but they bore a much larger proportion to the sum of human knowledge. They were the only organon of thought which the human mind at that time possessed, and the only measure by which the chaos of particulars could be reduced to rule and order. The faculty which they trained was naturally at war with the poetical or imaginative, and hence to Plato, who is everywhere seeking for abstractions and trying to get rid of illustrations of sense. Nearly the whole of education is contained in them. They seem to have an inexhaustible application, partly because their true limits were not yet understood. This Plato himself is beginning to investigate, though not aware that number and figure are mere abstractions of sense. He recognizes that the forms used by geometry are borrowed from the sensible world. He seeks to find the ultimate ground of mathematical ideas in the idea of God, though he does not satisfactorily explain the connection between them, and in his conception of the relation of ideas to numbers, he falls very far short of the definiteness attributed to him by Aristotle math. But if he fail, but if he fails to recognize the true limits of mathematics, he also reaches a point beyond them. In his view, ideas of number become secondary to a higher conception of knowledge. The dialectician, the dialectician is as much above the mathematician as the mathematician is above the ordinary man. The one self-proving, the good, which is higher sphere of dialectic, is perfect truth to which all things ascend, in which they finally repose. This self-proving unity of idea of good is a mere vision of which no distinct explanation can be given, relative only to a particular stage in Greek philosophy. It is an abstraction under which two individuals are comprehended, a whole which has no parts. Aristonic et. The vacancy of such a form was perceived by Aristotle, but not by Plato. Nor did he recognize that in the dialectical process are included two or more methods of investigation which are at variance with each other. He did not see that whether he took the longer or the shorter road, that advance could be made in this way, and yet such visions often have an immense effect, for although the method of science cannot anticipate science, the idea of science, not as it is, but as it will be in the future, is a great inspiring principle. In the pursuit of knowledge, we are always pressing forward to something beyond us, and as a first conception of knowledge, for example, the scholastic philosophy, may lead men astray during many ages, so the true ideal, though vacant, may draw all the dots in a right direction. It makes a great difference whether the general expectation of knowledge, as this indefinite feeling may be termed, is based upon a sound judgment, for mankind may often entertain a true conception of what knowledge ought to be when they have a surrender experience of facts, the correlation of the sciences, the consciousness of the unity of nature, the idea of classification, the sense of proportion, the unwillingness to stop short of certainty or to confront probability with truth are important principles of the higher education. Although Plato could tell us nothing, and perhaps knew that he could tell us nothing of the absolute truth, he has exercised an influence of the human mind which even at the present day is not exhausted. And political and social questions may get arise in which the thoughts of Plato anew, may be read anew, receive and may be read anew and receive a fresh meaning.